Waco.
We have mentioned Matt Rhule in Nebraska, played a couple of clips of what he said today. We all know him, we covered him, and of course his career know it well. Dirk Chatelain of the Omaha World-Herald covers Nebraska, wrote a column, a letter to Matt Rhule, and I read it. It made a lot of sense, and Dirk joins us on 365 Sports. Dirk, what would you say has been the reaction, not so much to the hire, but what the reaction's been since the press conference?
Well, you guys will not be surprised by this, but Matt Rhule is pretty good at press conferences, especially opening press conferences. He was really, really impressive. He hit all the right notes, made all the right priorities and points of emphasis. He had a couple nice touches talking about, Nebraska 1983 and his Penn State connection there, and Nebraska 1994 and his Penn State connection. And he's very savvy. He reminds me of he reminds me of a preacher, and he reminds me of a politician. And I mean that in a good way. So, like I said, these things won't surprise you, but I think he probably swayed a few doubters. Nebraska fans are reluctantly optimistic about this because they've been burned many times before. But I think everybody recognizes that Rhule has a track record that is sort of tailor-made for Nebraska's situation.
Dirk, is he the first coach they've hired since Frank Solich that is acknowledging that this is a rebuild and not a just turn Nebraska onto a different street kind of thing that they were trying to pull off before?
Well, it's a great question because you're right. So Nebraska went Frank Solich, which was taken over for Tom Osborne. That was obviously just compete for national championships with a different head coach type of situation, or at least tried to. Bill Callahan, that was supposed to be a quick reload because Frank Solich was coming off a 10-3 season. Bo Pelini, that was a quick reload. Mike Riley, that was coming off a 9-win season. So you're right. Frost was the closest, but because he was an alum and because he was coming off 13-0 at Central Florida, there was really no grace for a rebuild there. This is by far the most freedom that a coach has ever had to sort of stumble around and find himself a little bit.
Dirk, what's your understanding about how quickly this came together and kind of the lead up to this happening for Nebraska?
I think this played out over quite a long period of time. I think Rhule had an interesting contract situation in Carolina where he was going to get paid a whole lot of money regardless of whether he was coaching next year or not. So I think he had a notion to sit out entirely. And that would not have surprised people in the college world, I think, had he sat out next year entirely. But, Nebraska is, I think, especially of people from that generation, and Matt Rhule is a couple years older than me, but I think especially of that era, Nebraska still carries a lot of weight. And, when they're offering $9 million and a chance to coach in the Big Ten Conference, which has got all the resources that you could ever want, I think it was hard for them. To your point, I think it took a very long time to sort of get all the details ironed out.
So I know there was a lot of interest because he's a popular figure, former quarterback, and then he took over when Frost was fired, Mickey Joseph. I listened to Matt Rhule in his discussion about the staff. He was going to meet with them eventually. Is that going to be something that he has to weave through? Is that going to be something that fans understand you have to be who Matt Rhule wants you to be, or as far as what he wants on his staff?
Well, first of all, I feel like I should be interviewing you guys because you know more about Matt Rhule than I do. But I think it's going to be tough to make it work with Mickey Joseph because, first of all, I think it's hard for a new head coach to hire someone who just occupied that seat for 3 months and was very popular with the fan base. I don't think you want to have any sort of confusion about who's in charge. And I think it's tough from Mickey's perspective, too, because you occupy that spot for 3 months and suddenly you're the glorified receivers coach or whatever. So I don't know if it's going to work out. I think the fans would love it if it did, but I don't see it. I see a lot of obstacles in the way.
Again, Dirk Chatelain, he covers Nebraska football. Matt Rhule introduced after the story over the weekend. He was going to become the new Nebraska football coach, replacing Scott Frost. Now, the question is, this isn't easy, but I remember one time trading a text with him as he was no longer with Carolina about, how this would be a tough job. But he's taken tough jobs with Temple and also Baylor. Doesn't that kind of set this up of what he wants to do to get his hands dirty, to mold the clay? Isn't that what Nebraska needs?
Absolutely. And I think, there's been discussion about, is Luke Fickell a better hire or is Matt Rhule a better hire? And I think the reality is Luke Fickell might be better for Wisconsin and Matt Rhule might be better for Nebraska, because I think Fickell is walking into a little bit healthier culture, where it's probably a little bit more ready-made, I guess. Nebraska's got work to do, and I think maybe the potential for Nebraska might be a little bit higher than Wisconsin because of the financial resources. I think are a little bit greater here when everything's really humming. But it's going to take a head coach who isn't afraid to start from scratch. And everything that I've heard, Matt Rhule is very comfortable in that environment. So I think Nebraska is ready for that type of coach. And I think Rhule is probably really excited that if he can sort of do what he did at Temple and Baylor, the ceiling, is going to be as high as it was at Baylor, if not a little bit higher.
Dirk, what do you think the biggest thing that he has to wrap his arms around in the short term is?
Well, there's a really interesting situation here at Nebraska with because of the portal and NIL. I think a lot of roster decisions are going to be made here in probably the next month. I think Nebraska is an appealing target for NIL and transfers. There's a pretty good collective here. I think the financial resources for boosters here are such that Nebraska is going to be very competitive with NIL. So it'll be very interesting to see how aggressive Rhule is right out of the gate when it comes to the portal, or if he wants to sit back and sort of build from within or build from the grassroots. I think there is an opportunity at Nebraska that you saw this year with Casey Thompson and Trey Palmer and O'Shawn Mathis, who went from TCU to Nebraska. There is an opportunity, I think, to get some high profile transfers. I just don't know if Rhule is going to want to do that.
Dirk, thank you very much. In fact, the man of what we're talking about, Matt Rhule, is about to join us here on 365 Sports. We appreciate you. Let's stay in touch, okay?
All right. Thank you, guys.
Dirk Chatelain of the Omaha World-Herald will join us again down the road along with